Hey, I'm Bob at ILikeToMakeStuff. Today I'm going to make a third of a table with these guys. If you've only been watching here on YouTube, you may not realize that I actually host a couple of podcasts, and one of those has been going on for almost 8 years. It's called Making It, and I do that show every week with David Picciuto and Jimmy DiResta. They're both awesome guys, awesome makers, and you should definitely be following them. Usually we record that show virtually, but next week they're actually coming to where I live, and we're gonna do a live show at the Louisville Maker Fair. And we've only recorded live a couple of times. It's always a lot of fun, and we decided to take advantage of this opportunity of being in the same place to actually do a collab video. So we're gonna make a table. We're actually each gonna make a third of a table and then stick them all together. So we decided on a table thickness, how far off the ground the top of it is, and what the radius of this top is supposed to be. So we've got all those measurements, but we're not telling each other what we're gonna make. So this has the possibility to be the ugliest table in the history of the world. But we're just gonna have to find out. Let me tell you what my plan is for my section. I've known David and Jimmy for a long time, and I kinda have an idea of what they're probably gonna make, but who knows? I would imagine that David's gonna make something that looks really modern and slick and is probably made of walnut. And Jimmy is probably gonna make something with resin and a bunch of stuff that he found around his shop, but I don't really know what they're gonna do. So I decided to make my section of the table something completely different that they would not expect, and I decided to make it a game. I decided to make a Plinko game inside the table. Now Plinko is that game where you drop something in the top and it bounces off a bunch of little sticks all the way down, and it ends up at a random spot on the bottom. So we're gonna do that with this table. The top of the table is gonna be clear with a hole in it. You can drop a marble in and it'll bounce down through a bunch of stuff on the inside of the table, and then hopefully it will go out a hole on the outside profile of the table. I do have an idea how this is gonna work, but I'm gonna go ahead and model it in Fusion 360 just to make sure that everything's gonna work and everything has enough room to move. I know I say this a lot, but one of my favorite things about using Fusion 360 is being able to pre-visualize something to see if it's gonna move, if it's gonna work, before you make a single cut. And in this case, it was really big because I've got something that needs to move on the inside of another container. Let me show you. This model does a few things for us. One, it helps us make sure that this panel can move inside the table, but it also makes sure that the marble can actually reach each one of these holes on the outside so that you could theoretically get it to come out any of these different areas. I don't have all the pins modeled in because we're gonna do that in Illustrator, but basically this is a great way to just make sure that everything's gonna move and fit. And if you're interested in learning Fusion 360 for yourself, we've got an online course called Fusion 360 for Makers that you might wanna check out. I'll put a link to it down below. All right, let's go cut some wood. So to get started for this, I'm gonna use a piece of 1/2" MDF. I'm gonna use some basic geometry. I've got a little digital protractor here, a ruler and a pencil, and I'm gonna make a 120-degree angle, and then I'm gonna go out 12 inches, and that'll give me my curve and the outside profile of my table. These back walls are gonna be made out of 1/4" material, so I'm making a mark a 1/4" off this line, and then I'm gonna trace that. So I'm starting with my outer dimensions and working in for the material that I'm gonna add later on. There's probably a more mathematical way to do that, but honestly, that works pretty well. So I put that miter on the back corner of this so that these back two faces are correct. They should line up with the other two sections of this table. So I'm gonna use some glue to glue all three of these pieces together and add some pin nails along the bottom just to hold it while that glue dries. This thing isn't gonna carry any weight, so it doesn't really need to be that strong, but even still, the wood glue should be plenty strong enough. So this part is done. This was the easy part. So I'm gonna go ahead and paint this black because the front and the top are gonna be clear acrylic, and then the inside's gonna have a panel of orange acrylic with all the little posts sticking out of it. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this painted, then we can go to the laser and cut the other parts. So I got this piece painted, and we also have all the laser cut pieces. We've got the top section, we've got the inside leany part, I don't know what you call that, and then the front. And then we also have a whole bunch of acrylic rods that I ordered on Amazon. They showed up. They're pretty cool. I'm gonna have to find uses for these. These are little 3mm rods. I'm gonna have to cut them into tiny sections and then glue each one into each one of these holes. And so I'll figure that out later. But first, I've actually got to figure out how to get this thing mounted inside the table so that it can move freely. And if you remember, a few weeks ago, we made the thing for Mark Rober that had over 1,000 holes in it. So something like this is no big deal. So one thing I have to figure out is exactly how far the top has to be from the top section, because I'm gonna have to drop a marble in and it's gotta have enough clearance to be able to roll down. I stole a marble from my kids, by the way. And so I've just gotta figure out, I guess, whoa, from there, got to mark this location, and then this panel can't go any higher than that. This video is sponsored by SimpliSafe, which is fantastic because we're big fans of SimpliSafe around here. I've got a SimpliSafe security system in my home, we've got one at the office, and several of the people on the team have them at their houses as well. It's a great system because it's super easy to set up and super easy to use. Basically, you go to simplisafe.com/ILTMS and then you build out the system piece by piece that's right for you and your home. You can pick from indoor and outdoor cameras, you've got glass break sensors, water sensors, and a bunch of other stuff. And after you've built out the system that is good for your location, it'll show up at your house in a box. You don't have to wait on a professional to come install it or anything. You can do it in about 30 minutes and it's super easy. When your system is armed, if any of the sensors are tripped, their advanced response technology will verify that it's an actual emergency, and if so, you're gonna get priority dispatch from emergency services. It only costs about $1 a day and you can cancel it at any time. There's no long-term contracts. If you wanna find out more, go to simplisafe.com/ILTMS. That's gonna give you 20% off your system, and when you sign up for interactive monitoring, you're gonna get a free month. It's a fantastic deal. Be sure to go check them out. There's no safe like SimpliSafe, and big thanks to them for sponsoring this video. All right, so now I have to figure out how to get this thing in here. I've got to put one of these little acrylic rods underneath here so that it has a rod that can stick through that hole. And then that will be the kind of pivot point. And then if it's rested on the back, theoretically you should be able to do that and make it turn. So I'm using acrylic cement to hold these together, but it is such a small surface area that I'm kind of worried about it lasting over time. Total Boat has a 4-minute epoxy versus the 5-minute epoxy, so I'm just gonna mix a little of this and kind of bridge the gap between both of these pieces. So I'm trying to figure out how to mount the back corner of this orange panel, and we were talking through getting it in here because it's got to like fit through the front. It's got to be resting on something on the back. And so I think what we're going to do from the bottom side is actually put a little block of wood right here and then drill a hole in the back of this entire thing and drive a screw in through the table casing into that block of wood. So it'll capture this corner kind of in the back and will allow it to pivot on that screw, I think. Okay, so that gives me a flat spot so that I can drill a hole right there rather than on that top corner. So I can drill a hole right there and a little area for the head of the screw to go in so that it doesn't cause a problem with the other two sections of the table, because this back face has to touch the other parts. So. I'm trying to figure out the order of operations here, how to put this together. I do know the maximum height for the pins, so I can go ahead and cut those down and then glue them in place. And I think if I can get them glued in here, the block glued in here, then I should be able to slide the entire thing together, driving the screw from the back. And it'll be done-ish, and then the top, I guess. So I gotta cut a whole bunch of acrylic. So, ran into a little issue trying to work around it. I ordered these 3mm acrylic rods, and I cut 3mm holes in this acrylic, and it turns out that these rods are actually not the right size. They're 2.73, which makes them not quite fit, real wobbly, and so working them into the hole and just gluing around and like assuming that they're gonna be perpendicular to the surface is not the case. So instead, we're gonna actually put some tape on the bottom of these holes, lay it down on the table, and then use a little CA glue on each one of the pieces and just drop them in place, make sure that they're pretty vertical, and we'll kind of go from there. So we're also talking about the best way to cut these. You can cut these with like nippers. They are thin enough that you can just kind of, as long as you're wearing glasses, that works. But it doesn't leave a really clean edge, and you know, it's kind of a hassle. You have to go find each one that shoots off. So instead, I think we're gonna lay a bunch of these out on the laser bed, treat it as if it's a sheet of acrylic, and just run a grid through them so it'll actually cut into a bunch of different sections. At least we're gonna try that. We'll see how it turns out. All right, that worked out very well. Now I have a whole bunch of tiny pieces, so I'm gonna use tape just to grab them all. I realized that this is gonna go in at an angle, and it's gotta meet up in that back corner, so I went ahead and put a taper on it. It would have been way easier to do before I glued it on, but it was already on there. Ran into a little problem here. When you look at all of the rods this way, there are no real clear paths from this side to that side, but the way I laid it out, there are some very clear paths downhill, which in this case kind of negates the whole pin thing. So we're gonna add some stuff to this, and I think the way we're gonna do it is make some little clear acrylic walls and set them up randomly in between pins so that there is no clear path from top to bottom, forcing the marble to go some different direction. I think it'll just make it more fun. I was beginning to put the top on this thing, and I ran into another little issue that I just didn't plan ahead with. Basically what I should have done is made these back two walls out of 1/2" MDF, but instead, in trying to make the space as big as possible, I used 1/4" MDF, and the problem with that is that driving in a screw into that little thin edge makes it just want to fall apart. It wants to split, it wants to break because it's MDF. So I'm gonna try something which is maybe not the correct way to do it, but it seems like a good idea, so I'm gonna give it a shot. I'm going to drill a hole that's slightly bigger than the screw that I want to use, which is still very small. And I'm going to drill that hole down through the acrylic and through the MDF that's a little bit bigger, and then I'm going to fill that hole up with CA glue and then put in the screw. Now that CA should seep into the MDF and kind of create one big surface, and then it'll wrap around the threads of the screw, holding this top in place, I think. We'll see. As I started putting in those screws, I realized it would be even better to use some of those extra little pieces of acrylic, because they're actually the same size as the hole that I drilled, so they fit a little bit tighter, and theoretically they will kind of disappear into the acrylic top more. So I put in some glue, and then I'm going to kind of push these rods down into the holes and then clamp the pieces while the glue dries. So I've got the whole table put together except for the leg. That's the last thing that I need to do. David and Jimmy are gonna be here tomorrow, so I've got to do this pretty quickly. So I'm gonna go pretty simple. I've got a big, thick dowel here, and so I'm gonna use this as the leg. And a long time ago, I bought this set of hardware to make tapered legs. It's a little plate that goes on the bottom of your piece of furniture, and then there's a threaded insert and a threaded rod. So you can use anything you want as the leg, put the threaded insert into the end of it, and then use that rod to connect the two things. So that's my plan here. I'm just gonna cut the dowel to the right length, mount that hardware, and then my part of this terrible table will be finished. All right, my part is done, so now I just gotta wait for Jimmy and David to get here with their parts, and then we can glue them together. I would imagine that David's gonna make something that looks really modern and slick, and it's probably made of walnut. And Jimmy is probably gonna make something with resin and a bunch of stuff that he found around his shop. I hope you enjoyed seeing us build this kind of crazy looking table together. And if you want to see how they made their parts of the table, you should go check out Jimmy at
Jimmy DeResta
and David at
Make Something.
And you can find all three of us every week on the Making It podcast. We'll put a link to all of the stuff down below so you can go check it all out. Thanks for watching this video. If you're not subscribed, be sure to do that. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm Bob at I Like to Make Stuff. Today I'm going to make a third of a table. Third of a table. Step in. It's so satisfying. It's so satisfying.
My channel.
The same everything. Each is gonna have, okay. The same dimensions, the same diameter, radius. Dang it.